Uh, uh, Thank you, members of the Commission. Commissioner Pai, let me give you an opportunity to answer some of the statements that your colleague, Ms. Rosenworcel, made. Talk about what she said about the undermining the Lifeline program. What do you have to say to that?
Thank you for the question, Senator Wicker. It is absolutely false. Our goal is to make sure that the Lifeline program, once and for all, focuses on consumers, not on the unscrupulous companies that for too long have bilked the FCC, have bilked the American taxpayer of their hard-earned dollars. Our goal is to make sure that every American who needs help through the Lifeline program is able to get it. And that is precisely the reason why we are trying to target these funds on some of the folks who are vulnerable. By definition, every dollar that is siphoned off by an unscrupulous wireless provider, for example, cannot go to somebody who needs the help. And that's why we've taken aggressive action on the enforcement side to make sure that we weed out some of those unscrupulous actors. That's why we're looking at reforms currently in our pending proceeding to make sure that every dollar that is spent, so the Senate, this body, Congress generally, can have confidence is being spent to close the digital divide.
An interesting other side of that argument. What about the allegation that the Commerce Department expressed concern about the rush to reform and harm to national security and public safety?
First, in context, it's a remarkable example of plucking one little provision out of an otherwise very, very supportive statement. Nonetheless, we are working with our federal partners at NTIA to make sure that we progress based on the facts in the record. Moreover, I would argue, look at what the biggest argument thus far has been in all the comments: closing the digital divide and incentivizing more infrastructure investment. Every single dollar that is diverted to maintaining the fading copper networks that are in the ground now cannot go toward laying fiber, toward building 5G infrastructure, toward closing the digital divide with next-generation technologies. And so all of the hue and cry about the copper retirement and network transition rules and et cetera have to keep that overall focus in mind. Our goal is to close the digital divide, to make sure that folks in Mississippi and Montana and everywhere else have the same infrastructure that people in the big cities can take advantage of.
The statement by the Department of Commerce was largely supportive.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, how are we doing with the tribal governments?
There too, I've, to my understanding at least, I've engaged in more face-to-face consultations with tribes than a number of my predecessors combined. I've personally been on the ground in Mission, South Dakota, to the Rosebud Sioux Reservation. I've personally been to the Navajo Nation reservation in Arizona. I've personally visited with the NCAI College in Connecticut last year. And we've done outreach to, I believe, several dozen tribes in the FCC's headquarters that I personally attended for over 3 hours. It is important for us to close the digital divide, and that nowhere is that digital divide greater than on tribal lands. I was recently in the Flathead Reservation, as I told Senator Tester. When you see what is going on in St. Ignatius, how a lot of folks are worried about their future because they don't have broadband, and they think, well, we need to move to Great Falls or Billings or even a bigger city to be able to get that technology, that is something that we need to address. That is exactly the reason why we focused on tribal broadband, on providing more operational expenses for tribal carriers, for incentivizing it through the tribal broadband factor and our rate of return reforms.
Okay, see if I can squeeze two more in.
Sorry.
On the net neutrality,
yeah.
You've got a choice when you're going to regulate the internet, and that's the light touch approach that has really brought about the success of the internet for all except 2 years of its existence. And then you have the idea that we should use a 1934 Act designed to be applicable during the Depression era to the Ma Bells. I suppose since the new order by the FCC, I assume we've had a spate of throttling and blocking that's just been outrageous. Has that been the case since the FCC entered its new order?
That has not been the case, Senator. We were told for many months that this decision would be, quote, the end of the internet as we know it, that if this decision passed, you would get the internet one word at a time. That has proved flatly false. It has been 67 days since the repeal. The internet is still working. It's open and free. The FCC is working with FTC to protect consumers. And based on the example of VTEL that I suggested, there are many others that show that our decision is having a positive impact.
You know, you were having to rush through your statement, but I do believe that the Washington Post gave that allegation 3 Pinocchios. So your full report, your full statement will be in the record. One thing I do want to agree with is the maps are a real problem.
Can I address that, Senator?
Well, absolutely.
So I'm very pleased to announce that the FCC has adopted an order that would extend by 90 days the period within which carriers, farm bureaus, Senator Joe Manchin, to whom we granted a waiver, everybody can file a challenge to those maps. We want to make sure we give everybody a full and fair opportunity to participate in the challenge process to make sure we're operating on the basis of accurate data.
And I think you've granted a waiver to the Mississippi Farm Bureau.
That is correct.
They want to challenge it. Actually, I'm asking Mississippi State University's Innovative Center to explore using drones and see if we can get better information with the use of some different sort of challenge. I don't know that we're going to get an accurate map, even with the challenge process. But I do think there is widespread concern across the political spectrum that we're going to end up with a map that doesn't fairly distribute this $4.5 billion to people who need coverage. So work with us on that. I'm still skeptical. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Senator Blunt.